Coming up, we have the story of a measure of justice for the Fairbanks Four. We head to Maine to check in with the new leader of the state's Tribal-State Commission and the latest from Washington, D.C. with Holly Cook Macarro. We have those interviews, plus headlines ahead on the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
The ICT Newscast is sponsored by the Indian Land Tenure Foundation, a nonprofit organization serving American Indian nations and people in the recovery and control of their rightful homelands. On the web at iltf.org.
Support for the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez comes from the Arizona PBS studios in Phoenix at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University.
Thank you for joining us. I am Aaliyah Chavez. We start today in Arizona, where a Mainstay museum and archaeological site in the Phoenix Valley has a major change to its name and look. I was there Tuesday to see just how. These signs are brand new here at the Sa'adav Vaki Museum in Phoenix, Arizona. When this institution first opened in 1929, it was called the Pueblo Grande Museum.
I don't know the exact person who named it.
I spoke to Nicole Armstrong Best, who is Sa'adav Vaki's administrator. Earlier this year in April, the Phoenix Parks and Recreation Board voted unanimously to change the name. Then, months later, leaders from the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community and the Gila River Indian community came together to celebrate.
And I just think it's important for the future of our young people growing up and the generations to come to know and see what their tie was to this whole area when they have to leave our communities and they come into these areas to know this was our Aboriginal lands.
This area is over 1,500 years old, giving us just a small glimpse of the lives the Hohokam people lived long ago. Platform mounds, ball courts, and irrigation canals are just some of the features here.
Basically, this was an ancestral village. It was much bigger than the actual piece that we have preserved today.
Armstrong Best told me among the details preserved here, the two segments of canals are some of the most special.
The ancestral O'odham created the most extensive canal system in North America. And that is one of the reasons that the city of Phoenix is actually built here.
Around the U.S., there have been various monuments and landmarks with new names. In those cases, many of the changes have usually dealt with controversial figures. But here in Phoenix, the museum staff say this is different.
Pueblo Grande just means large village, so it wasn't offensive, but it wasn't appropriate. We also wanted to highlight the changes that we have been able to make, apart from just, the main name change, but we have changed our interpretive philosophy. We are incorporating Native perspective and Native voice into our signage. So we wanted to really show people how granular those discussions were with our consultation process.
Reporting from Phoenix, Arizona, Aaliyah Chavez, ICT News. Next month on December 9th and 10th, the Sa'adav Vaki Museum will open its doors to its annual Indian and Young Artists Market. It is free for Indigenous people and military personnel. Well, a beloved children's show has been nominated for some major awards. Netflix's Spirit Rangers was nominated for a whopping 6 awards in the second Children's and Family Emmys. The nominations include Best Preschool Animated Series and Best Directing. The show follows Shumash and Cowlit's siblings, Cody, Summer, and Eddie Skycedar, as they enter a spirit world in their California state park.
The Spirit Rangers are here to protect every crook, cranny, and critter.
Voice actors from the show also received nominations for their work, including Talon Prock Alfred, who plays Eddie Skycedar in the show. No date for the ceremony has been announced due to the ongoing SAG-AFTRA strike. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. So many of the stories we report are about injustice, including missing and murdered Indigenous women or Indigenous people who are incarcerated at rates far higher than other populations. Today we have a different account, a measure of justice. ICT's Mark Trahant tells us more.
This story starts in October 1997 in Fairbanks, Alaska. George Freese, Eugene Benn, Marvin Roberts, and Kevin Pease were convicted in the murder of a teenager, John Hartman. The men and the Alaska Native community were never wavered in saying that the four men were innocent. They were labeled the Fairbanks Four. They served 18 years in prison for crimes they did not commit. Brian Patrick O'Donohue was a reporter covering the case at the time. We talked to him in 2019.
We published a series in the News Monitor, my old newspaper, in 2008 that really laid out all the questions about the case, but I couldn't prove who was innocent. And that's where the Innocence Project came through with intelligence about, secret confession that really became the focus of everything that followed. And we had a new group, and I did help the Innocence Project in trying to vet some of their new evidence, and we knew now who killed John Hartman, and it's established behind a shadow of a doubt, and cold case troopers, validated everything that was suspected, and they were taken off the case before they were finished the report, but they testified on behalf of the Innocence Project, So there's no question that these guys were innocent. The Fairbanks Four were innocent, and the state's settlement is just a cynical disregard of justice, and I think a cover-up.
I have a story about this too. Many years ago, I was in Fairbanks and I visited with Brian Patrick O'Donohue. It was near sunset, and he took me downtown and told me where to stand. Then he walked away and took up a position far off. When he returned, he asked, "Could you identify me?" That's what had to have happened to believe the prosecution's case against the Fairbanks Four. A taxi driver testified that she saw four Asian-looking men in the area of the murder. She claimed to have heard Hartman's pleas and the killers, who she said had Native accents. The American standard for justice is supposed to be a higher bar, beyond a reasonable doubt, and that was a standard that was clearly not met. The Fairbanks Four, Pease, Crow, and Freese, Vett, and Roberts, are at the basket. Today there is one measure of justice, and perhaps the state's cover-up is no more. 3 of the 4 Indigenous men will receive a total of nearly $5 million in a settlement confirmed this week by the city of Fairbanks. What makes this story so extraordinary is that in order to get out of prison, they had to agree not to sue the state of Alaska for their false imprisonment. However, later courts ruled that the agreement was not binding because it was coerced. In 2019, Marvin Roberts talked to ICT about the case.
I was wrongly incarcerated and spent many years in prison along with 3 of my friends. The deal was I was already out on parole, so my 3 brothers, the Fairbanks Four, the rest of them were in jail. The state came at us with a deal saying if we don't sue certain entities, including the state, we would be I guess I'm trying to have trouble getting the right words. We're not exactly exonerated, but our names are going to be cleared, and it basically was, I guess you could say, blackmail, kind of. That's how I feel about it. Yeah, no, I did not have to sign the deal. I was already out on parole. I was still under the state, the yoke of the state, I was still under their supervision, so I wasn't exactly free. But I was free enough where I didn't have to sign that deal if I didn't want to. But then my brothers were still in jail, and we know more than anybody how precious time is. So they wanted me to sign. They wanted me out of jail. So who am I to keep them in jail? So I signed. And that being said, we are actively suing the city of Fairbanks for what happened to us. And so we appealed a decision. Sorry, I'm starting to get cold here. We appealed a decision. We're waiting on that appeal to see if we could go forward with that lawsuit against the city of Fairbanks.
Roberts is still the only of the four who has not agreed to a settlement. His case is still pending. Pease, Breeze, and Bett will each receive $1.5 million from the city's insurance. According to a statement provided by Fairbanks City Attorney Tom Shard, the city also said the decision to settle was made by its insurer, the Alaska Municipal League Joint Insurers Association. According to the Associated Press, the settlement includes a provision of a non-publicity clause in which the men and their attorneys agreed to not make public statements about the case until the claims by all the men are resolved. The Alaska Attorney General's office at the time said the settlement was not an exoneration, and it called it a compromise that reflects the Attorney General's recognition that if the defendants were retried today, it's not clear under the current state of the evidence that they would be convicted. In Phoenix, Mark Trahant, ICT News.
So how slow is justice? Another prison inmate confessed to the murder in 2012. 3 years later, the Fairbanks Four were released from prison. We should note that former ICT journalist Patty Tulahungva contributed to that report. Penobscot citizen Jill Tompkins is an accomplished attorney with deep experience in federal Indian law. She was recently named executive director of the Maine Indian Tribal-State Commission. As she told ICT's Stewart Huntington, she feels she's taking over at a time when public opinion in her state is shifting toward the tribes.
I'm really coming back to my own roots because I attended the University of Maine School of Law. And while I was there for 3 years, I never heard anything about tribes or Indian law. And my first job, one of my first jobs out of law school, was actually coming back and working for the tribe. So I ended up learning about the Maine Indian land claims settlement and really pieces of federal Indian law at the tables of tribal elders. They'd invite me over for coffee and they would talk to me about it. And it was really shocking that I had never heard anything about it through law school. And then my family wasn't particularly political, like my mom wasn't, so didn't really discuss it, and I was only 17 when it was passed. So I actually got my start in Indian law almost backwards, looking at the Maine Indian Land Claims Settlement Act, which is so different and so unique and so novel compared to what's going on in the rest of the country. So I've been out and I've been practicing and even teaching federal Indian law. And this just seemed like a great opportunity to come back and bring all that knowledge and those experiences I've had with other states and other tribal-state relations to this work. And I guess the other thing is that the Tribal-State Commission kind of had its ups and downs, and some of it's based on who the chair is or who the executive director is, on how active it is and how much one sees it. So, and it seemed for several years that there was really nothing coming out of the commission. And then times when the commission would come up with recommendations, as they were statutorily required to, they would get to the legislature and they would get ignored. But in the last few years, momentum has really shifted. That public opinion has really shifted in favor of the tribes and looking again at these issues of tribal self-determination and sovereignty and can't we work something out? And settlement acts has really negatively impact the tribes, that they are in a worse economic situation than almost all other tribes in the rest of the country. And it's because of these onerous provisions that were put into place.
The Claims Act, signed by President Jimmy Carter, was amended by the Maine legislature this year, but Governor Janet Mills vetoed the bill. The legislature almost overrode that veto.
The fact that it really came close to having enough votes to override her veto is just so remarkable. You know, in the 40-year history of the Settlement Act, we have never had that kind of support from the legislature. So the governor has invited the tribal chiefs to meet with her. So maybe that will help to, open some new lanes of conversation, see what her specific concerns are. She talked about, inadvertent consequences, not knowing what would come of this versus, my experience has been with working with tribes that are not subject to a settlement act. It's just a tribal federal relationship. Like, you can look at that. That will give you an idea of what things could look like if some of these provisions weren't in place. So we're seeing moving that bill ahead or modified in some way. Something that definitely the tribes are still interested in. Being really close.
I asked Tompkins about resources, education, and collaboration.
And here I live on the Penobscot River, and the paper companies over the years have just dumped, tons and tons of dioxin in the water, to the point that even though we have reserved fishing rights, you can't eat the fish. And I remember my grandmother telling me, don't go swimming, don't open your mouth because the river is so polluted. So that's something that they're definitely looking at addressing. I think that the Wabanaki Studies bill is still moving forward, and I'm incredibly interested in that bill that requires the teaching of Wabanaki Studies in Moon's Falls, because this law is over 20 years old and hasn't been fully implemented. And then I know that on our plate is to look at the implementation of the collaboration statute. And that basically requires the state agencies to come up with policies on how they're going to collaborate with the tribes, but it's not like a complete process. I worked in Colorado where they have the Colorado Commission on Indian Affairs. It's a much more formal structure, and it was very effective. And so I'd like to see something more like that, where it's a very regular seating and there's a consultation process instead of saying, here's what we're going to do, and there's no work with the tribes to say, does this work for you, and how are we going to carry this out on a daily basis? I mean, years ago, actually, when Governor Mills was first elected, I wrote to her and I said, this is what I think would be a great idea. Can you look at Colorado and put this in place? And I think the collaboration bill maybe came up very quickly, and I don't know how much discussion there was with the tribes about the actual language. So I think that it could probably stand for some refinement. So it's a really exciting time to join the commission and to help continue to move this along. Some progress has been made, but more needs to happen. And the commission is really active on a number of fronts.
Jill Tompkins, thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy to join you. Thanks for asking.
The fallout over the removal of Kevin McCarthy as Speaker of the House continues. Congress only has a few days left to fund the government, and yet there is no path for the House, the Senate, and the White House to reach a consensus. This is a busy week in Washington as tribes and organizations are on Capitol Hill telling their story. Breaking this down is ICT regular contributor Holly Cook Macarro. She is the founding principal and president of The Angle, and she's also a board member of Indig Public Media, the parent company that owns ICT and the ICT Newscast.
I am in Washington, D.C. this week, where there are a number of Native orgs and tribal leaders in town. It's a little bit that time of year, but Indian Collective is here with a full force of about 25 staff, and they are in the middle of their impact days. I've been talking and working with them and doing a number of meetings and advancing their priorities that involve advocating for the return of the Black Hills, for Leonard Peltier, against mining in the Black Hills, in support of the administration's rule on Chaco Canyon, in support of the Navajo Nation allottees. So there have been a lot of really productive conversations there. And I know that the Navajo Nation leadership is also in town. We have IAIA in town. And yesterday, the White House Youth Summit was hosted, and we saw a number of youth from around the country, including some celebrity Indigenous leaders like Taboo and others who joined the youth conference. So it's a very busy week in Washington, D.C., as the Congress is moving towards trying to find an agreement to keep the government open. It's kind of a good point to lead on why it's so important for tribes to come and do things like impact days and share their views. And it's another way of, kind of individual consultation, in that our federal officials, and with this administration having so many Native people in very high and confirmed appointed positions, that these priorities from all of these different groups and sharing them is very impactful and in line with the Impact Days theme. So the feedback and the building of relationships is really a way that we continue to build on and expand our Indigenous political power and influence. And part of that at this time of year is the influence on the appropriations process. And that is really what we're seeing take place when I say they are trying to come to an agreement to keep the government open. As we saw during the whole debacle around Speaker McCarthy's loss of the speakership and the long road towards the election of a new one within the Republican caucus, the agreement they came to ends on November 17th, which is 10 days away, with no real sign of any agreement that would mark the year-long agreement that's needed to fund the government for FY 2024. And there's a couple of different proposals on the table, some very unique, a laddering of kind of some easy bills to pass and kicking the can to the new year with holding off on passing those appropriations bills. But with no real agreement in sight, it's important that Indian country is here, and ensuring when there are any pay-fors or any cuts that are being considered, that we are protecting tribal programs and weighing in with tribal priorities. The issue of only doing this on Republican votes, which Speaker Johnson is moving forward, I don't even think it's fully supported within the Republican caucus. It's a bit of a made-up kind of thing that I believe came out of the Tea Party efforts, that these bills have to pass on only Republican votes when they are in the majority. I think it really fosters less efforts towards bipartisanship or identifying common ground when there is such a close split. So I do think it's a problem, and that it doesn't foster the sort of work that the Congress should be doing and finding, and that I think America really wants to see. Their representatives, and for instance, I can only assume that Navajo Nation is meeting with Congressman Crane from Arizona, and who is in line with their position and carrying a bill that supports their position around the rule withdrawing continued exploration around Chaco Canyon. So there's that relationship there. We also saw Congressman Crane offer a number of amendments to the Interior Appropriations Bill, one of which would have reduced Secretary Holland's pay to $1. That amendment made it out of the Rules Committee, and it was voted on the floor. I think that's the sort of nonsense that America thinks really is this the sort of time that should be taking up the time of the Congress when we're looking at a government shutdown. So it is really, I think, important, obviously, to build those relationships. I point to that as kind of a silly thing that happened in the Congress last week. That interior bill, thankfully, is not going to see the light of day. The Senate has already indicated many of those provisions they don't agree with, and they will be sending back a different proposal for the House to consider. So it is though very impactful and very important that these tribes meet with their delegation and their representatives throughout the state to, I think, weigh in on whether you agree with them or not, to let your positions be known. I think reading the results of the elections, everyone is looking to them as a way to read the tea leaves as we move into 2024. Obviously, the presidential primary is heating up, And so as we get those results coming in, there's going to be a sense of what the enthusiasm level is, where folks are falling on the issues. And it appears that turnout is good in Virginia, Ohio, and the results of those, I think there's going to be just a lot of analysis, really drilling down into who turned out, what the numbers are, and all of those demographics. It will be an important bellwether for what we're going to see in 2024.
We have one election note from Tuesday night. Maine voters overwhelmingly voted to include all provisions in the state constitution. That doesn't sound like much, but it includes the state's treaty relationship with tribes, something that began when the region of the United States was still Massachusetts. The ballot measure is considered a win for tribal sovereignty. A spokesman for the Penobscot Nation says the vote honors the legacy of tribes in the state. Well, be sure to join us on the next ICT Newscast. We will learn about how every family can preserve their own history. And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.